Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It is the 19th of December, 2019. I'm one of your hosts, Byron Pace. I'm recording this intro from the States this week, and so my brother is back in Scotland. Incidentally, it was his birthday last week, so happy birthday, Daryl. This is the last show of 2019, and so we have something a little different for you. Our first in an upcoming series of notes from the field where we venture out on location to discuss new and exciting work in conservation. To kick it off, I thought we'd start with someone that we've had on the show before, and I travelled up to the north of Scotland to meet up with fisheries biologist and director of the Ness District Salmon Fisheries Board, Chris Conroy, where I got to learn all about river restoration and Atlantic salmon. But before we get into that, I need to give a shout out to our Patreons and a special end of year thank you, I think, to everyone who has supported. Our top tier Patreons this week are Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Chris Griffith, John Henry Pete, Tom McCraith, the guys at South Esher Stalking, James Benjamin Normandale, and finally, but absolutely not least, James Marchington. We don't have a winner from the competition we ran 2 weeks ago because nobody managed to get the right answer. We had lots of people identifying that the sound was a bird. We even had some people managing to work out that that sound came from an owl. So what we're going to do is I'm going to roll that sound over to this week and we will carry it on. Now that you've got the extra information that you were looking at the sound of an owl, what I want to know is what type of owl does this sound come from? As we do with every show over the last few months, we will pick a winner at random out of the correct entries, and you will win a copy of Volume 3, Modern Huntsman, who are, of course, our partners on this podcast and have been for a long time now. I'm looking forward to meeting up with Editor-in-Chief Tyler Sharp in only a few weeks now at Dallas Safari Club. So if anybody is going to be at Dallas Safari Club, let me know, and maybe we can grab a beer. Volume 4 is of course out and shipping, so if you place an order it will ship within a day or two of us receiving it. There might just be time to squeeze it in before Christmas, so hurry up and get your order in. All the feedback from Volume 4 has just blown us away. Keep an eye out on Modern Huntsman Instagram in particular if you want to see what other people have been saying about Volume 4, the women's issue. And if you haven't ordered it, it makes the perfect Christmas present, but it's also a very, very good gift for yourself. And even if you don't do Christmas, you need to have this in your library. If you like this podcast, it is essential reading. So anyway, without any further delay, I will let you listen to the same sound that we played 2 weeks ago. Make sure you get your entries in, and I hope somebody gets it right this time. After this show, we'll be back on the 9th of January. So from both of us, we hope that you have a great festive period. Thank you so much for your support over 2019. If you like this truncated, more highly edited show from the field, do let us know. We won't be stopping our long-form interviews, but we would like to do a few more of these kind of shows in between times. Well, I won't hold you up anymore. We're going to jump straight into it now, grading fish at the hatchery.
PC00613-9D6.
Did you say it's a hen fish, did you say?
Yes.
Is it mature?
Yes.
That's a perfect fish because it's a hen, produces eggs, it's got no siblings, so we can cross it with basically any within that group. So that's a perfect fish, that one, really.
Chris, welcome to my office, in my car, in the rain, in a forest somewhere towards the west of Scotland.
Yep.
I've just joined you for the morning working on a fascinating project. Give me a little bit of the background. I've seen what's going on in there with the salmon, and you were explaining all the genetic sampling, but what is it in aid of? Tell me about the river system and why you're undertaking this project.
Right, so this is the Upper Garry Salmon Restoration Project. and we have a population of fish in the Upper Garry. This is the Inverness Garry, not the Perthshire Garry. It's in a really bad condition at the moment. So you've got basically a number of impact factors on that population. You've got the sort of general decline we're seeing in salmon. But
across the board?
Across the board, yeah. But on top of that, you've got issues related to hydro. There's a lot of large-scale hydro on the system. You've got issues from aquaculture up there, and you've also got previous poor management, to be honest with you, by the Fishery Board as well over in the past. And so what you've got is a population that's gone from 900 fish swimming through the fish counter into the Upper Garry system to last year just 27. So wow. a massive decline.
So almost functionally extinct.
Getting there. It's in a really bad state. So as I said, there's a lot of impact factors there from a lot of different organisations. And what we've done is, rather than sit and point the finger at each other in a room, we've all got together and we're all contributing to this project to try and...
Because there's a lot of funders to make this happen.
There is, yeah. And then SSE are the main funders here. SSE have been really good. They're really keen to improve the situation up there. And they basically brought us all together in the room. We're all working together to try and kickstart a self-sustaining population again up there.
And what was the first step in that took you down the line that I've been witnessing today?
Yeah, so the first step was, I think it was either 2004 or 2006, before my time here, was to try and improve access to the system. So there's always been adult access through the dam. There's a fish lift, ball and fish lift in there. So that works pretty effectively. But further up, there was what they call a heck, which is a fish trap. And when they put the hydro in the 1950s, they decided to place this heck in a location where it actually cut off one of the main spawning tributaries. It wasn't really well thought out at the time. And the fish had basically for over 60 years couldn't get up past there. Wow. So in 2004 or 6, I can't remember exactly which one it was, they took the screens out of the heck and let the fish go through naturally. And there was an improvement, but only a slight improvement. And if you compare it to the neighbouring River Morriston, where you've got a similar situation, the Morriston population has been gradually improving for the last 30 years, whereas the Garry has just continued to decline. So we thought there might be a little bit more to it. And then I identified this issue with potential integration, whether it be from escapes from the farm, the smolt rearing facility that's there, or whether it be from previous mismanagement where fishery boards in the past did used to put fish of farm stock in to supplement the wild stocks.
And at the time, they thought they were doing a good thing.
They did, yeah. So I mean, it's important that we're open and honest about this kind of thing. You've got to learn from mistakes in the past.
Mistakes,
yeah. So there's issues there with integration. So you've got inbreeding and you've got non-native strains in there as well, and then you've got hydro dams and you've got loss of habitat. So the habitat's very fragmented. So you don't tend to get spawning. You don't get very often where you get spawning habitat and par habitat, for example, so together. And if the numbers are low, the fish aren't meeting each other. Simple as that. The fish are not finding each other.
So now we have an overview of the problem. The question is, what is being done to help the river system recover? Well, it starts here, in a series of tanks filled with fish in the middle of a forest. Chris explains.
So you'll see the smaller than they would be if the fish are smaller than they would be if they're grown in the sea, but these are actually doing really quite well size-wise.
They don't look that much like salmon.
They're more spotty, and I think it's to do with the diet and the fact they're being brought on in fresh water, but they are most definitely salmon because we've genetically profiled them.
I believe you.
Yeah, we always do get worried because you do doubt yourself sometimes, and you think, if we'd got it wrong, we would be found out, basically. So
that's the process now. You're going to drain this and then scoop them out and take them next door.
They drain the tank, they anaesthetize them just to relax them. So the whole idea here is you want to keep stress down, so you don't want fungus associated with stress. John is an expert at handling these fish, so he anaesthetizes them, calms them down, and then we go through the handling process, which is handling is minimum. We don't want to handle them too much.
You don't want your hands literally on them.
But they will touch them, but wet hands, etc. Yep. But we need to minimise that. I mean, it's essential that we know what we're doing. And some hatcheries wouldn't go to this detail, but for us, it's really important that we do this properly in terms of we need to know what fish is which.
The Upper River Garry project is led by Chris, but the Drimsally hatchery itself is run and operated by John Gibb. He explains the operation and how it started.
So we've got a variety of projects that go on here. It's about 20 years old, this hatchery, and over the years we built it up, largely through assistance from the aquaculture sector. working together. We've now got a pretty developed wild restocking hatchery here, as well as a live gene bank. So what I mean by that is we've got various strategies for the restoration of rivers using artificial rearing. But we've also got stocks in here from individual rivers. So there's several rivers in here. They each have their own tank. They're each tagged in their own individual way. And what you've got is actually, even if you never use those fish, you've got almost like an insurance policy.
If something was to happen to those rivers.
Some sort of environmental disaster, or, there was issues with Gyrodactylus salaris, a particularly nasty fish disease in Norway, where they had to poison rivers and then restock them. So we're covered against that kind of thing by having the indigenous fish in here. So we do lots of different strategies. Over the years, they've changed as scientific knowledge about the impacts of stocking have changed and developed. And these days, I mean, much of what you saw today with the Garry fish, this is a strategy that we're using more and more on other rivers. We've been developing it over maybe about 12 years now. So this idea of, instead of removing your adult fish from a river, your adult salmon, to use as broodstock, what you do, as you probably saw, is you trap the smolts going to sea. I like to think of them as the doomed majority, because we know that 95%, maybe even 98% of those fish are going to die at sea. So it's almost like a wasted genetic material. So we bring them into the hatchery and we grow them onto adult fish. Now, the advantage of that is quite a number of things, but one is we're not taking adult fish from the river because they're incredibly precious these days.
And they're spawning anyway in the river.
And they're spawning anyway, exactly. So we much prefer just to leave them to get on with it. But by taking the smolt, we can actually, as I say, utilize fish that would die at sea anyway. And of course, everything is, as Chris has explained, genetically screened. Different subgroups within a population. We weed out any farmed fish because this is a significant issue. Where you get aquaculture, you get escapes, and this can.
Why is that a big problem? Having the farmed fish infiltrating the population?
Sure. So it's been demonstrated through pretty robust science now that infiltration of non-indigenous genetic material into your population can have a deleterious effect. In that individual populations have evolved over thousands of years to adapt to their particular river. So, for example, when you look at fish from let's say a very rocky, tumbling type river, they tend to be quite streamlined because they need that body shape to get up waterfalls and push on into the hills. And where you get sort of more lowland type rivers that flow just, say, through farmland, or much more gentle rivers, you tend to get much deeper fish. So you take a river like the Wye down in the southwest of England, you'll get a very, very deep, large salmon with a very deep belly. And you take a river in, say, the Scottish West Coast Highlands, they tend to be much more narrow. And this is just a visual example of how natural selection
But it's
work.
important for their survival.
It's extremely important because you then introduce what is actually a Norwegian gene, because all our farm fish in cages around here are from Norwegian parents. You introduce that into the stock and it can have significant effects, negative effects. So this is why they're all screened out during all of our hatchery processes. And this is a relatively new thing with the hatchery now. We didn't do before because we didn't have that tool, but we now have genetic tools to be able to do this. So hatchery work in general, I mean, you may be aware there's a lot of fairly contentious arguments surrounding hatcheries. And I think one of it was you don't really know what you're crossing with what. You're slightly playing God in the hatchery and you're deciding which fish to cross with which fish. Well, this is getting us closer to what nature would do. In other words, identifying subgroups within the population. So, for example, what we're probably identifying in some of these rivers like the Garry is, let's say, a sub-tributary of the Garry. We're identifying that through the genetic screening when they come in the hatchery. So we're only crossing that group within that group because that's what we can assume would happen in nature. So we're getting closer to a more natural scenario. The hatchery is never going to be natural, purely natural. But as I say, with the more tools we have at our disposal, the closer we can get to that.
You're slowly mitigating the unintended consequences.
That's correct.
No,
that's absolutely right. Yeah. And of course, this whole point of actually not removing wild spawning fish from the wild to do that?
DC00
Yeah.
611
611
C89
C89.
henfish.
So that's a. Hold on a sec. So that's a group 3. So that's a green tag. Yeah. So we've got 2-year classes of fish in the hatchery at the moment. We've got fish that were caught as smolts on the way out of the river in 2017. So they've already been stripped once last year. So they're equivalent to a multi-sea winter salmon, a repeat spawning multi-sea winter salmon. And then we've got the 2018 fish, which were caught as smolts in spring 2018. They are equivalent of grills, and they've been stripping for the first time today. So what we need to do is find out how many are left alive and how many, which ones are which, because each fish is individually tagged, and so we can identify it. And then we have a spreadsheet here that links the tag number with the genetic results. So from that we know how big it was when it was caught, what genetic group it's in, and who are its brothers and sisters. And then from that, at the moment we're putting them separating them into groups and identifying them visually. And then when it comes to stripping them, makes the process a lot easier.
Seems like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, yeah, it is.
Intuitively, one of the essential ID points for this is to know whether the fish is male or female. John shows me the visual cues to look for.
So we're looking at the difference between cockfish and henfish. And there's an example of a cockfish. You can see in the pointed snout there. And this is the kype, the hook here that the cockfish gets. And also on the belly here, there's a tightness and a flatness to it. And it doesn't have a extended vent here. So that's the cockfish. By contrast, let's try and find a henfish. So this is a henfish, the rounded snout here, no kype, and extended vent. And you can see here, much more rounded bellies. This is obviously where the eggs are maturing.
Sure.
This is how we tell
It looks more feminine.
Looks more feminine.
So what process am I about to see here, Chris?
So what they're going to do is they're draining the fish at the moment are held outside in big outside tanks. They're draining the tanks down, and they'll bring each fish in one at a time, and they'll put them on the workstation here. And we've got, this is a pit tag decoder. So you rub that over the fish, and it comes up with a code, like on here.
Okay, so yeah,
and
it's
then
on the screen.
Chris will read the code out to me. I'll do a search on this spreadsheet, and that'll tell me which fish it is. John will look at the fish, look at the condition, see whether it's mature or not, whether it's going to be strippable this year, look at what sex it is so we know how many males and females we've got, and then he's going to put an external tag on it. So it means if it loses its pit tag during the stripping process, we can still know which fish it is. And then that fish will be put into one of the tanks. I don't think any of these fish will be ready to strip today. It's more of a sorting process, you know. So at the end of the day, we'll know how many fish we've got and how many of each sex and how many in each group. So the idea of this project is to kickstart it, pump prime it, give them a helping hand with the right genetic stock to try and boost the numbers to a point where they start recovering. And that's the whole aim of it. So, yep.
So you're bringing these hatchery-reared fish online,
Yep.
putting them back into the river system. They came from the river system,
Yep.
and then eventually you extract yourself and let the natural cycle take over.
So it's called time-limited intervention. So because the adult numbers are so low, the usual way to run a hatchery is to take adult fish on the way up and at spawning time. But given there's only 27, they're doing it right. We wanted to leave them to get on with the job themselves. We don't want to mess with those fish. So instead, we've been taking smolts on the way out, so the 2 to 3 year old juveniles on the way to sea. And the benefit of that is most of those will not make it back. I think the current survival rate is about 2 to 5%. So by taking those fish, you're not actually having an impact because you're taking fish that wouldn't have survived anyway. And we only take a very, very small proportion of what leaves the river. And
but your survival rate once you take them is much higher.
It's much higher, yeah. So we're taking those smolts and then we're growing them on to adults. So they're not going back in themselves, but their offspring are. So, and then we're stocking eggs. So although we're in a hatchery today, we're not actually hatching anything. The hatching goes on in the river, which means the fish are more streetwise. The first bite of food they have is wild, and so they're fitter and stronger. So
that's fascinating. Yeah, I saw the pictures of you doing it earlier this year. Give us the spec of that fish. One by one, they process and recorded each fish from the tanks outside. Chris explains just how much information is gathered in order to do this successfully.
In the first year, they don't get as big as they might do. The average size is much smaller, as you can see. So they produce less eggs, and the eggs are kind of a bit of a lower quality as well. So
you're still using the eggs, are you?
Yeah. So in other programs where they've done this in other countries, they've not used the first years of eggs, but we don't want to waste any, so we're using them anyway. And then the second year is when you get more eggs, higher quality, and we'll probably get about 150,000 eggs in total, which is, on the scheme of things, isn't a huge number, but it's enough. From the results of our surveys this year, they're definitely taking, and we're seeing a significant increase in both fry and par in the stocking reaches. So this is a process. It takes a bit longer doing it in freshwater, but it's a lot of a safer way to do it. So I better get ready to do this anyway. So
DC 00 643 4E2.
4E2. So that's a group 4.
But if you look for an overall impact, it would be marine survival. Marine survival is what is limiting the population size of salmon at the moment. Obviously, there's local factors as well. There's hydros in some places. There's
Chris explained that with the Garry as a
exactly. So the Garry
example.
Exactly. But I mean, in general, we in some places, and I should stress, it's only some places. Hatcheries are not an appropriate response for probably the majority of Scottish rivers, to be honest with you. But there are places where it's a sensible management response. Alongside, you've got to make sure your habitat's in good condition. But if you've got your habitat in good condition, the habitat is accessible as it can be, and you know that smolts are able to go to sea without any undue predation on them, for example. If you've got all that in place and still you're not getting enough adult salmon back to repopulate the habitat with juvenile fish, then you're probably getting closer to a scenario where a hatchery is part of a suite of responses that you would consider. It starts to make sense, yeah.
It was 133 millimetres long, which is slightly bigger than average, and it was 2+ years old, so we know we've got a lot of information on every fish. Here we go. So.
Hen fish.
That's a sign of inbreeding depression there. They've got loads. So this one here had 2 brothers and sisters within the same sample. So these are probably the upper Garry population.
As a result,
there's not enough
fish there.
Yeah.
As we go through the fish, it becomes clear just how important the genetic sampling is.
We'll have a think about it later, yeah. So this is a fish that either there wasn't enough genetic sample or it was a bad genetic sample, so we can't get the genetic profile from it. So because it's a major part of this is we are profiling them all. If we don't know what it is, it could be a farm fish, so we can't use it basically. Yeah.
One of the things I was curious to find out was how the salmon fare being reared in fresh water, when in their natural cycle they will migrate to the sea.
Yeah, so they do go to sea, but they don't have to go to sea. So the difference, so basically their natural instinct is to go to sea, and the offspring of these fish will go to sea, but if they can't, they don't. And you do get landlocked populations of salmon in the wild as well.
Do we have any in the UK?
None in the UK, no. But there are places in Norway and Canada and places like that. Newfoundland, I think. The only difference is these fish won't grow as quick because the food source isn't quite as rich. So that's why they're smaller. It's just when they're out at sea, they're packing food on prawns and other fish, and they're really packing the weight on. So they're getting the right nutrients. We've got a particular diet we feed them, so they are getting the correct nutrients. But it's difficult for them to build the mass that they would get at sea. So people often ask us, if we grow them in fresh water, will their juveniles stay in fresh water? But no, that's not the case. They will still migrate. Yeah,
that's built into their DNA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
A lot of people have assumed that hatcheries are exactly that. You stick some fish in a tank and you sort of go off and do something else. We're full time on this, and we've been involved in several projects that have started out with extremely keen and well-meaning groups of people, usually angling groups, that want to see their river recovered. They start a hatchery, and halfway in they realise that actually there's a lot more work and dedication than they imagined, and sadly a lot of them have actually lost their fish through it. So what we're finding now is we do several rivers out of here, And it's our client rivers tend to be groups that have recognized that fact, recognized that what we have here is fully alarmed water systems, and you can see the rain coming down here today. You know, our intake burn will be shooting up. There'll be leaves piling down. We've got alarms and all of this, so you know we lessen the risk. But that's just one example. We're 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
You can't disappear from here.
You cannot disappear.
Otherwise, the risk is very high.
That's right. That's right. And you can't get any insurance. No insurance company would go near you. So you've really got to. You've got to do it that
insurance.
way. Yeah, exactly. But it takes. I mean, I'm very, very lucky here. I've got very dedicated staff that go well beyond the call of duty to keep this place running. I'm extremely lucky and very grateful to them.
That was caught on the 15th of April 2018. That was 122 millimeters, which is pretty much average size, and it was 3 years old.
Cockfish, DC 00 643 4E2.
Yeah, some people, criticise biology and science in fisheries management, but this is where it comes in as well. We've got this spreadsheet here. We've got all this information. There's a whole load of science behind it, and we've got a real practical management application. It's not science for science sake. It's evidence based. It's informing the actual management work, and it has a specific output. And that's the way we like to work. Evidence based management, and we don't do any science unless it's got a practical management application. And it's important people understand that, because if you're going to do something, you need to robustly assess it, have all the evidence available, and do it properly. Yeah.
What would be the flip side of this project without the science, just sort of the more grunt force manhandling of trying to do a good thing, but without the knowledge that you've managed to gain? What would be the output of that?
Well, firstly, we wouldn't be allowed to do it if we did it that way. And secondly, you have the potential to reduce the fitness of the population. And when you've got a population like this, you saw the group 4, they are likely to be the Upper Garry population. They've got multiple siblings. They're obviously depressed in what we call inbreeding depression, where the numbers are so low, they're interbreeding. You could make that worse. So the way we're doing this, we're actually going to lessen the impact, because we're going to make sure they don't inbreed with siblings. So yeah, it's just, we should, as a result of doing it this way, have a fitter product at the end of it. The wild fish at the end of it should be fitter, and fitter as in more robust, more able to survive, to fit to the actual system, and to survive climate change and things like that. The fitter the fish is, the more chance it's got of surviving in the long run.
Because these fish in different river systems have adapted to those river systems and to be able to survive. So
exactly.
Moving populations from one river system to another, not only could it be massively detrimental, they also won't survive as well as fish that have adapted.
Exactly, and even on here, this is one river system with 4 distinct populations within it. So not only do you get different populations in river systems, between river systems, you get different populations in river systems. So these 4 groups are genetically distinct from each other, and I can show you I've got a family tree that the geneticists have produced for us, which demonstrates it, and some of them are very, very different genetically. So what we're doing is we're making sure we only cross the fish within those groups. So some people would say you should mix them, but if you mix them, you lose those genetic
the traits that make them
specific traits. Yeah, so we're crossing within those groups as well. So but if we weren't doing this work, we wouldn't know what we were crossing. We could be crossing brothers, sisters. We could be crossing different groups. We just wouldn't know. It's quite an eye-opener doing it this way, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing to see it in this level of detail.
It's more work, but it's worth it.
As I discovered throughout the morning, this project wasn't just about putting fish eggs back in the river. There was also an important missing link in the natural cycle, as Chris explained to me.
Yeah, so the adult fish, we only strip them, we only take the eggs or milt from them twice, and there's a number of reasons for that, but the main reasons are, A, we want to continue to have good genetics. We don't want to keep using the same fish. And B, once they've been stripped once, it gets harder and harder to strip the fish each time you do it, because the body cavity builds up, and it's not right to put the fish through it too many times. So we've decided twice. The reason we do it twice is because in the first year, if the fish are grown in fresh water, they're quite small. And the eggs are smaller, so second year the eggs are better quality. So rather than just basically throw those fish away, they're humanely dispatched at the end of the process. We freeze them, and then when we put the eggs out, we take the carcasses up with us and we dig them into the bed of the river around where we've put the eggs in. And so as they decompose, they increase the nutrient levels. So in the past, there would have been, not all Atlantic salmon die after spawning, but a lot of them do. And so you would have had
It's not like Pacific, which
not
basically
like
all
Pacific.
die. Yeah.
No, it's.
But there is a proportion which die off.
There is a proportion.
And if you don't have them running the river, you don't have the nutrients going back into the river.
And those marine nutrients, I mean, everyone knows Pacific. They've taught you the stories about, the salmon feeding the trees, but it is important here as well. And people don't. It's only recently people have really started thinking about that. So
and in the upper reaches of these rivers, there's not much there.
No, and the upper the Kingi where we're putting a lot of these fish in it would have been forested naturally. There's no forest. There's very little riparian vegetation, and now you're losing this wild salmon input as well. So the idea is we put that in and we give them a chance again. We're just trying to improve the chances of surviving, basically. So
of course, the big question is, will it work? And are there any early indications?
So this is a long-term project. Before we really know it's working, it could be 20 years. So there's a long-term investment in this. But what we can say is we've stocked eggs for 2 years, and we're getting good numbers of fry and good numbers of parr now as well in the second year. So that's the 1-year-old fish and the 2-year-old fish. And we are now getting densities higher than we've ever recorded in the Garry because we've got a long-term data set. And it's really important if you do a project like this, you have to monitor before you do it, during and after, to make sure it's working. Because if it's not working, you don't do it, And so people can learn from it as well. So we are seeing, for example, one of the sites we do, it's a small burn. In the past, the highest density of fry was 1.7 per 100 meters squared, which is basically one fish. And it had been surveyed 5 times, and we only ever got one.
Okay, so this wasn't an anomaly.
Yeah. And historically, it would have had fish. Now we're getting, this year, I think we got up to 27 fry per 100 meters squared.
It's a massive improvement.
And it's not a huge density compared to other areas, but it's really good. Yeah. And we also got parr for the first time ever in there. So we got, I think it was like 10 parr per 100 meters squared. Anything over about 15 we would class as excellent parr per 100 meters squared. It's not like the densities we get in the Ness, where we get up to 400 fry per 100 meters squared in the River Ness, but you wouldn't expect that in an upper system anyway, because
it's a different environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we're getting encouraging results, is what we would say.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Chris. And it's intriguing to see the process, and I'm looking forward to coming out with you in early part next year.
Excellent. Yep.
Thank you very much for listening to the show. We both hope that you have a fantastic festive period and can join us again at the start of 2020 on the 9th of January for our first podcast of the year.